The wind screamed across the plains like a wounded animal. It tore at the brittle grass and kicked dust into the dying light, drowning the world in a storm the color of ash. In the distance, thunder rolled low and slow, like something ancient waking from a long sleep. Lightning flashed far off the ridge, and beneath it, barely more than a shadow against the road, walked a child. She couldn't have been more than 6, small, thin. Her dress was torn at the hem and crusted in dry earth. Mud caked her boots, one of which flopped slightly with each step, the sole barely hanging on. She carried a worn burlap sack in one hand, and in the other, a limp rag doll missing one button eye. Her hair was tangled and wind-whipped, sticking to her damp cheeks. She didn't cry, not once, just walked. Behind her, miles back, was a body slumped in a shallow gully. Her father, shot in the chest. He hadn't said anything after he fell. She had waited for a long time, even as flies came and settled on his lips, even as the sun started to fall. When she finally stood, it was with the slow certainty of someone who already knew what alone meant. She did not bury him. There were no tools. There was only wind and dirt and a road that led away from death. By the time she reached the gate, night had swallowed the land whole. The storm had finally broken open. Rain fell in sheets. The wind bent the trees near sideways, but she didn't hesitate. Her steps slowed only once she saw the cabin's faint amber light flickering through a curtained window. She paused at the fence, head tilted. A single horse stood under the awning of the barn, ears flicking. Beyond it, the cabin, rough-hewn logs, a stone chimney, and a wide porch like a forgotten mouth. She approached the door and raised a fist. She knocked. Inside, the rancher sat at his small table, sharpening a knife. A tin plate of beans sat cold beside him, untouched. The fire crackled behind him, but he hadn't added wood in an hour. He didn't need much heat. The room was quiet except for the rhythmic hiss of metal on stone and the wind clawing at the windows. The knock didn't startle him. He paused, listening, as if unsure whether it had been real or imagined. Another knock came, softer this time, then silence. He rose slowly, pushing the chair back with a scrape of boot on wood. He reached for the rifle near the door, not out of fear, just habit. Whoever was knocking in a storm like this wasn't likely selling pie. He opened the door a few inches, barrel first, then peeked past it, and there she stood. Rain plastered her hair to her face. Her lips were blue. She looked up at him and didn't flinch at the rifle, didn't speak, just stood there like she belonged nowhere else. He lowered the gun. The door creaked open the rest of the way. He stared at her for a long moment. She didn't step forward. She didn't plead. Her body swayed slightly like the wind might take her. "Where's your folks?" he asked. "Nothing." He looked out into the storm, half expecting someone else to appear. A father behind her, drunk and stumbling, or a mother yelling curses from the dark. But there was only the sound of the rain and the girl. He muttered something under his breath and stepped aside. She didn't hesitate. Her little feet squelched against the wooden floorboards as she entered. The fire reflected in her wide eyes. She moved toward it without a word and knelt, spreading her fingers toward the warmth. He shut the door. The room suddenly felt smaller. He set the rifle down slowly, eyeing her as she sat like a ghost in front of the hearth. She hadn't asked for anything, not food, not help, not even his name. He poured her a cup of water and handed it to her. She took it carefully, sipped, and handed it back without a "owned." The doll rested in her lap, its one eye staring back at him. Something about it, the frayed thread mouth, unsettled him. He didn't ask any more questions. What good would it do? The rancher didn't like company, hadn't for years, not since the war, not since he buried a wife and daughter under the cottonwoods west of the fence line and swore to hell he'd never open that part of himself again. He wasn't cruel, just tired. A man too used to silence, but something in that silence now felt different. That night, he didn't sleep well. The storm howled and scratched at the roof like nails against coffin wood. Outside, the barn door banged loose. A wolf's distant howl curled under the window panes. He rose twice to check the locks. Each time he passed the hearth, he glanced down at the little shape curled on the rug, wrapped in a blanket, her doll tucked beneath her chin. She never stirred. Morning came gray and heavy. The storm had passed, but its weight lingered in the damp air. Mud pooled in wagon tracks. Trees leaned lower. The rancher stepped outside and surveyed the damage. A section of fencing had come down near the back lot, and one of the barn's support beams had cracked. He cursed quietly and rolled up his sleeves. Midway through hoisting a new beam into place, he heard small footsteps behind him. She had followed, dragging a half-filled bucket. He turned. She didn't meet his eyes, just placed the bucket near the base of the beam and crouched beside it. She touched the split wood, examining it like a puzzle. He frowned. "That's not your job." She didn't move. He sighed and returned to the task. She stayed the entire time, handing him nails, holding pieces steady. When it was done, they stood side by side, both covered in sawdust and sweat. He didn't thank her. She didn't expect it. That night, she fed the chickens without being told. Took his plate when he finished and washed it in the basin. She didn't speak, not even once, but every movement was deliberate, precise, like she'd been doing it for years. He started leaving out food for her, quietly, without saying so, just a second plate on the table, a second spoon. One morning she left a flower on his seat, a wild violet, crushed but still purple. He didn't acknowledge it, but he sat down and didn't move it aside. Days passed. He asked her name. She didn't answer. He showed her the barn, the horses, the grain shed. She followed every instruction with eerie attention. One afternoon, she found a piece of chalk and began drawing on the back wall of the barn, small stick figures of a man and a child holding hands. She left space beside them for something else, a shadow maybe, a memory. At night she'd sit near the fire, doll in hand, staring at the flames like they whispered secrets only she could hear. Once, he found her standing by the grave markers behind the house, just two wooden crosses, worn by time. She didn't touch them, just stood there, eyes glassy, before turning and walking back inside. She never asked who was buried there, and he never told her. He'd begun to hum again, just under his breath, tunes he hadn't let out in years. He whittled small carvings in the evenings, tiny animals. He left them near the hearth. She began arranging them in circles, some kind of game. One day, while chopping wood, he caught her watching from the steps. Her eyes studied the rhythm, the precision. He handed her a smaller axe, said nothing. She took it, placed a log, lifted the blade. It was too heavy, but she tried. It didn't split, but the attempt was enough. He smiled, just once. She saw it. Her lips twitched, uncertain. That night, she drew another figure in the barn. 3 now. Then came the morning she spoke. He was repairing a saddle strap when her voice cut through the quiet like a bell. Just one word. Safe. He turned sharply, staring at her. She didn't repeat it. She just looked at him, her expression unreadable. Then turned and went back to the chickens. He didn't chase the moment, but something cracked inside him. Not a collapse, just a shift, like an old door opening for the first time in years. A week later, he heard riders. 3 of them, coming up the ridge from town. He stood from the porch and watched their shapes emerge from the tree line. They weren't bandits. Too clean, too confident. Lawmen, likely, or worse, officials. He didn't wake her. She was inside, asleep near the fire. As they dismounted, he crossed his arms. His rifle leaned behind the door, untouched. The lead rider, a deputy with sharp eyes and cleaner boots than any man should have in this country, tipped his hat. "Morning," he said. The rancher didn't respond. "We heard a child's been seen near here, alone. Couple folks in town saw her near the edge of the trail last week, thought it odd." Still, the rancher said nothing. "You haven't seen her?" The silence stretched. The deputy's eyes slid toward the window. "If you're harboring a stray, even if your heart's in the right place, it's against the law. Papers gotta be filed, guardianship claimed through the courts. It's the way of things." The rancher nodded slowly. "And if the law's wrong?" The deputy blinked. "Beg pardon?" He said nothing more. Inside, behind the thin curtain, the girl watched, her doll clutched tight. Her eyes met his through the glass. And for the first time, she didn't look afraid. He didn't turn around, but he felt her there. The deputy sighed. "We'll be back in a week. I'd think real hard on what side of this you want to land, sir." They rode off. He watched until they were specks on the horizon. When he stepped back inside, the fire had burned low. She sat on the floor, waiting. He picked up a small carved horse from the table, handed it to her. She took it, nodded once, and set it beside the others. They didn't speak, but the silence between them no longer felt empty. It felt like home. The mornings were colder now. Autumn had peeled away the color from the trees, leaving only bone-white branches clawing at the gray sky. Frost gathered on the porch railing before sunrise, and the air carried a brittle stillness that foretold an early winter. The girl had been with him nearly a month, and though neither of them spoke much, their rhythm had settled like dust on old furniture, quiet, consistent, necessary. She woke before dawn now, not because he told her to, not because anyone ever had, just instinct. A small figure moving through shadow, lighting the stove with practiced hands, fetching water from the well with fingers gone red from cold. He watched from the doorway some mornings, arms crossed, saying nothing. Each task she did was deliberate. She tied her boots tight. She wiped her hands on her dress only after she was done. Her doll, now nearly falling apart at the seams, always stayed close. Once he offered to patch it. She shook her head. It wasn't about fixing. He had started marking her height on the doorframe, quietly, when she wasn't looking. The first mark was barely knee-high. After a week, he made another. She didn't notice until the third. She said nothing about it, but after that, she began standing a little straighter. He taught her how to carry eggs without cracking them, how to hold the reins of a horse without pulling too hard, how to listen for the sound of a nail that's not set right in wood. She learned by watching, always watching. One evening they sat on the porch, a lantern flickering between them. The world beyond the ranch had gone quiet. No coyotes, no wind, just the long hush of a land holding its breath. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a rock, flat, gray, with streaks of blue like rivers frozen in stone. She placed it on the porch between them, gently, then nudged it toward him. He picked it up, turned it over in his calloused palm. It was smooth, worn by time. "Where'd you get this?" he asked softly. She pointed to the hill behind the barn. He looked at the stone again, then at her. "You find anything else up there?" She nodded. "Show me tomorrow?" Another nod. They left the stone there between them. By the time the first snow came, the barn was fully repaired. The girl had helped drive nails, steady beams, carry feed. She never complained, not when her hands blistered, not when a splinter made her cry silent tears in the corner where she thought he couldn't see. He noticed. One night she left a tiny stick figure made of twine and straw on his nightstand, a small cowboy hat carved into its head. It looked absurd, almost laughable, but when he held it in his hand his chest tightened. He set it on the shelf above his bed, beside a picture he hadn't looked at in years. He never told her what it meant. She didn't ask. Then came the storm. It started in the late hours when even the fire had burned down to embers. He woke to the sound of the wind wailing through the chimney, the sharp slap of ice against the windows. A blizzard, fast and mean. He dressed quickly and lit a lantern, checking the locks, the barn, the horses. One of the colts had broken free from its pen, panicked by the cold. By the time he got it settled, he was limping. A beam had slipped, striking his leg just above the knee. Nothing broken, but swollen and hot. He gritted his teeth as he dragged himself back inside, sweat freezing to his brow. She was waiting for him by the door. She didn't speak, just helped him sit, fetched clean rags, warmed water, and tore strips from an old sheet. He watched her as she worked, her hands small but steady. She rinsed the wound, wrapped it tight, and stoked the fire back to life. Then she sat beside him and leaned against his arm. It was the first time she touched him without prompting. He didn't move away. The next day the storm raged harder. Snow piled against the windows. The world outside disappeared into white. They stayed near the fire. She curled beside him, asleep, while he carved a bird from pine. Each stroke of the knife was slow, precise, as if the act itself held meaning beyond the shape. When he finished, he placed it gently into her hands. She didn't wake, but her fingers curled around it. Later that week, when the worst of the snow had passed, he spotted someone near the edge of the tree line, a figure in fur, tall and still, watching. He stood at the window for a long time, eyes narrowed. The man didn't move. Then, slowly, he turned and disappeared into the trees. That night, there was a bundle of dried herbs on the porch. The girl picked it up and sniffed it, then looked at him. "Pain root," he muttered. "Old remedy." She touched his leg, then pointed to the herbs. He nodded. She boiled them in a kettle, watching the water darken. He drank it, grimaced, and said nothing, but the swelling began to ease over the next days. The figure appeared again a few days later, this time closer, a native man, tall, solemn, eyes dark and deep-set. He didn't speak, didn't draw a weapon, just stood near the edge of the barn until Sawyer approached. Neither man smiled. Sawyer said, "You the one leaving the herbs?" The man gave a single nod. Sawyer motioned to the porch, but the man didn't move. The girl stepped out from behind the door. She held the carved bird in one hand. The man looked at her, tilted his head slightly. She walked to him, stopped a few feet away, then held out the bird. He accepted it carefully as though it were glass. After a long pause, he gave her a small leather pouch. She opened it. Berries, dried meat, and a tiny blue stone. Sawyer watched as the girl tucked the pouch into her dress pocket and stepped back. The man turned without a word and vanished into the trees. After that, he returned every few days, always silent, sometimes with food, sometimes with bark and roots Sawyer hadn't seen in years. The girl began calling him thaw. Though he never said if it was his real name. He never entered the cabin, never ate with them, but his presence became a part of their rhythm. One afternoon, Tahu and the girl sat by the creek behind the house. He showed her how to follow animal tracks in the snow, how to listen for the snap of dry twigs underfoot, how to taste snow for signs of ash or poison. She absorbed every lesson like soil takes rain. Sawyer watched from the porch, not jealous, not threatened, just aware of something shifting. When Tahu left that day, the girl sat beside Sawyer and drew in the frost on the railing. She drew 3 figures this time: him, her, and a taller one with long hair and a bow slung over the back. They still hadn't asked each other's names. They didn't need to. But the world beyond the ranch didn't forget. The law hadn't. One morning a letter arrived from town, tucked into the fence post by someone who didn't knock. It was stamped with the sheriff's seal. Sawyer read it twice. The girl watched his face change, like shadows crawling across stone. He folded the letter and placed it in the fire without a word. She reached out and touched his arm. His hand covered hers. Later that night, as they sat in silence, she finally whispered, "They'll come back, won't they?" He looked at her, startled. She hadn't spoken in days. "They will," he said. She nodded. "Will you send me away?" He stared at the fire, jaw tight. "No." Simple. Final. She leaned against him, and he felt the weight of her trust settle over him like snow on an old roof. Quiet, patient, and unrelenting. The next morning, she wore a red ribbon in her hair. One she'd never worn before. Where she'd found it, he didn't know, but it made her look older, or maybe just stronger. They chopped wood together in silence, fed the horses, repaired the front steps. Later, she handed him a drawing, charcoal on canvas, rough but clear. 3 figures, arms linked, behind them a cabin, above them the sky, and beneath them roots, thick, twisting, and deep into the earth. He looked at it for a long time, then nodded. She smiled. And for the first time, so did he. That evening, they sat on the porch as the sky burned gold. Tahu stood at the edge of the trees, watching. He didn't approach. Sawyer raised a hand. Tahu nodded once, then vanished into the dusk. They didn't speak of what was coming, but both knew. The world was shifting, and silence could only keep them safe for so long. The air was brittle with tension the morning the riders returned. You could feel it in the way the horses approached, too steady, too slow, like they weren't just crossing land but drawing a line through it. The girl had seen them first from her perch in the loft, 3 dust-speckled shapes cresting the ridge just beyond the cedar trees. She didn't call out. She simply climbed down, walked into the cabin, and set her carved animals back in their drawer. There would be no more playing today. Sawyer stood by the fence, arms resting across the top rail, watching them come. His hat was low, shadowing his eyes, and his face was carved with something harder than stone: resolve. The snow had melted into mud, and the path that led to his door was nothing but churned earth and broken silence. The girl moved beside him. She didn't take his hand. She didn't need to. Her presence alone said it all. The 3 riders dismounted about 20 feet from the porch. The same deputy from before, clean boots, clean mouth, and not a trace of warmth in his eyes, stepped forward, letter in hand. "Mr. Sawyer," he said with the practiced politeness of someone used to being obeyed, "we gave you time." Sawyer said nothing. The deputy nodded at the girl. "The child is not yours. She was found without guardianship. The county requires custody transfer to a registered home. This ain't personal, it's the law." The wind caught the hem of the girl's coat, lapping it gently like a flag too tired to stand tall. "You came all this way for paper?" Sawyer asked finally, voice rough. "I came all this way because a child doesn't belong out here under a roof with no name on her," the deputy said. "You don't have adoption rights, you don't have claim." "She has a place," Sawyer said. "She has food, warmth, care. And none of that matters without ink, the deputy replied, stepping closer. You think you're the first man with a good heart who thought he could make the rules different for himself? I'm not trying to change the rules, Sawyer muttered. I'm just breaking the ones that need breaking. The deputy's jaw tightened. Behind him, the other two lawmen shifted slightly, hands near their belts. Not threatening, not yet, but close enough. The girl didn't move. She stared at the men, expression calm, but her small fingers balled into fists at her sides. Her doll remained inside the house, left on the hearth like a marker, a promise she didn't plan on breaking. I'll make this clean, the deputy said. You hand her over. She's processed, might even end up with a decent family. Or you stand in the way, and we write this up however we want. Obstruction, unlawful harboring, don't think you'll get another letter. Sawyer took a breath, deep and slow. Then he stepped forward just one pace and placed himself squarely between the girl and the deputy. She stays. The words hung heavy. No guns were drawn, no threats were shouted, but something in the stillness cracked open, like the sky before a storm. One of the horses snorted nervously, sensing it. The deputy's voice dropped, all pleasantry gone now. You do this. You're choosing a fight with more than me. You're saying a child's feelings matter more than the law. Sawyer's gaze didn't flinch. I'm saying presence matters more than papers. That's staying when it's hardest, when everyone else has walked away. That's what makes a father. The girl looked up at him. Her eyes shimmered, not with tears, but something stronger, trust, unshakable, earned. The deputy took a step forward, and a voice rang out from the trees. Then he is not standing alone. Every head turned. Tahu stepped from the edge of the woods, bow slung over his back, a bundle of hides under one arm and something else in the other, a document folded and sealed. The deputy's face twisted. This a threat? Tahu ignored him. He walked to Sawyer and handed him the document, then looked at the girl, giving a nod of quiet assurance. Sawyer unfolded it. It was a tribal accord, handwritten, signed and sealed by Tahu's council. It recognized the girl as a ward of their protection under mixed lineage, not official by government standards, but enough to stir waters the county preferred not to swim in. Sawyer read it slowly, then passed it to the deputy. You push this, he said. You're not just arresting me, you're breaching territory. And if you do that, this won't be words anymore. The deputy's hand hovered just above his coat. The girl stepped forward, just one small step. I'm not going, she said clearly. Her voice was steady. You didn't come when I had no one. He did. That's the end of it. The silence that followed was a living thing. Even the horses stilled. Finally the deputy exhaled. You know how this looks to the town? I do, Sawyer said. They'll talk. They already are. Let them. The deputy looked down at the paper in his hand, then at the girl, then at Sawyer. He didn't tear it up, didn't fold it, just handed it back without another word and turned to mount his horse. Don't make me come again, he muttered. Sawyer said nothing. They rode off without fanfare. When they were gone and the dust had settled, Sawyer let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The girl turned to him. What now? He looked down at her. Now we plant something that us. That spring the land changed, not all at once, not magically, but in small, certain ways. The porch was repainted, the broken step was replaced. A new garden was planted, rows neat and narrow. He taught her how to press seeds into the soil, to water without drowning. She taught him how to listen, really listen, when someone said nothing at all. They built a coop for more chickens. She painted each board in bright colors, red, blue, yellow. It looked ridiculous. He said so. She said nothing, but the next day she painted his boots. He wore them anyway. Tahu came often now. He brought herbs and advice, and sometimes just silence. He never stayed long, but each time he would sit with her by the creek for a while. She asked about the stars. He told her their names. She started reading more. He taught her letters at night by lantern light. She stumbled over the words, scowled at the page, but didn't quit. And one day she read aloud without help, a full sentence. This place is ours. He didn't correct her, didn't say there was more to read. It was enough. Sometimes they spoke about her father, briefly, quietly. She didn't remember everything, just flashes. A beard, the smell of whiskey, the sound of coughing. She never asked if he was good. Sawyer never answered. But one day, she said, he didn't stay. And Sawyer simply nodded. I'm glad you did. So was he. By midsummer, the crops took root. She ran barefoot through the tall grass, her laughter echoing against the hills. The porch became their evening place, him with his whittling, her with her books. Sometimes, neither of them said anything for hours. But the silence no longer felt like something to survive, it felt earned. It felt like peace. One evening, as the sun burned low and the sky turned lavender, she climbed into his lap, her head against his chest. Will they come back? She asked. Maybe, he said. Will you still choose me? He looked down at her, eyes soft. Every damn time. She smiled and closed her eyes. The stars came, out slowly, and the wind carried the scent of blooming sage across the valley. Somewhere in the dark a coyote howled, not in fear, but simply to remind the world it was still wild. She didn't wake when he carried her to bed. He tucked her in, straightened the blanket, and placed the old doll beside her pillow. Then he stepped outside, leaned against the porch post, and lit his pipe. He stared out at the darkness, eyes searching the horizon not for danger, but for reassurance that what they'd built could hold. The law hadn't won, but it hadn't disappeared either. He knew the difference between peace and a pause. Still, he would take this moment, this stillness, the weight of her trust, the promise she hadn't needed to speak. He stayed there for a long time, pipe cooling in his hand, night wrapped around him like an old friend. Behind him, the house glowed warm and soft. Inside it, the only thing he'd come to believe in again. Belonging, not bought, not signed, not granted by law, but chosen. And when dawn came, it found them both still there, one sleeping, one watching, both home. In a world where the law measures love by ink and signature, they proved that the truest family is not written, but chosen. That staying, when it's hardest, is the bravest kind of love. Fade to black. Soft text appears on screen. If this story moved you, if you believe family is more than blood, like this video, comment your thoughts below, subscribe for more cinematic Western stories that speak to the heart, and remember, sometimes the ones who stay, save us the most.